Thank you. Okay. To begin with, I'd like to give you an overall schedule of things for the next 3 days. The title theme is the Seeing or Discovering Jesus in the Old Testament. And this time I chose the wilderness journey as a main theme for the 3 days. And so first day will be we will be going through the wilderness. I believe our Dean Gwek Chu has been taking you through the wilderness every morning, and so it'll be very familiar to you. But I will do a very brief. Hopefully, how many years did the Israelites spend in the wilderness? 40 years. I have 4 hours today. So through the 4 hours, we'll try to finish the 40-year wilderness journey. And tomorrow, we'll talk about Jesus being the high priest by looking at the role, the garments, and the tasks of the high priest that God has instituted while they were in the wilderness. And third day, we're going to talk about the tabernacle. And the importance of them, I will share as we go along. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce you to some biblical hermeneutics. Does anybody know what this means, hermeneutic? It's a way of interpreting the Bible. And there are many different categories of hermeneutics, but I'd like to introduce to you two main categories. First is Christocentric, and second, Christotelic. There are theologians who like to focus on the Christotelic way of interpreting the Bible, and there are those who emphasize on the Christocentric. What's the difference? Telic means this word telos comes from Greek word, which is telos, which means from that word we get the word like telescope, telephone, telegraph. Can you take a wild guess what tele might mean? Telescope is scope that allows you to see something far away. Telephone is something that allows you to hear something far away, right? So telos means the end or far in distance in terms of space or time. So this way of interpreting the Bible, they say Old Testament stories are historical, not necessarily has so much meaning in terms of redemption and salvation. However, later after Jesus came to this earth, died on the cross and resurrected, in the New Testament, people are really going back to read the Old Testament and saying, oh wow, this kind of sounds similar. It looks like it was prophesying what Jesus would do. So only after they see the end, they realize what God had planned in the Old Testament, in the history of the Old Testament. Okay? Which is biblical. Christocentric is also biblical. This, more of the Reformed theologians concentrate on, follow this belief. Christocentric belief is that centric, you know what centric means, right? Center. Christ was the center of all the events. So even from the Old Testament, from Genesis, the Garden of Eden, from in Noah's Ark, Abraham's life, in the wilderness, Jesus was there. True or false? True. We are true right away. And that's why I like Tung Bible School here. But there are many, many places in the world, believe it or not, more places in the world nowadays that will not say true. They will say, Jesus wasn't really there. It is only after things happened that they kind of relate it to Jesus. That's more of the Christotelic. Christocentric is, Jesus was there. In the creation, Jesus was there. Okay? And I believe in this. John chapter 1, 1 through 3. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that Word, without that Word, nothing that was created was created. Right? And later, verse 4, verse 5, verse 11, verse 14 tells us that Word came in the flesh. His name is Jesus Christ. So, was Jesus just born in the New Testament, or was he there from the beginning? From the beginning. Was Jesus there in Noah's Ark? Was Jesus there in the wilderness? Yes. So, I believe the right view is the entire Bible is Christocentric, but at the same time, Christotelic. Because not only was he there, but he connects and he works things in a pattern where that incident becomes a prophecy of what will happen and what he will do in order to save us. And so, if you ask Orthodox or rabbi or Jewish religious Jew, what is the greatest... Oops. Can you tell I'm nervous here? Greatest story of salvation. If you ask a Christian, greatest stories of salvation is the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But to the Jews, the greatest story of salvation is the Exodus. The Exodus event. God, to be more specific, Yahweh, saving our people, the people of Israel, from the slavery in Egypt. That was the greatest story of salvation for them. Even today, when they keep Passover, when they go through the Feast of Booths and Feast of Tabernacle, they go back and read the story of the Exodus and say, this is our God of salvation and God of redemption. And so we can see from after the fall, God does the work of salvation through Exodus. Of course, through the ark, Noah's Ark, right? Noah's flood, Exodus, right? And then from Babylon. And then comes Jesus Christ. And then in Revelation. There are different times, but all these times, all these different events of salvation, God uses the same method. And so we're going to go back and try to discover and see where was Jesus and what was he doing in the wilderness journey. Excuse me. So let us turn to Genesis chapter 15. Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 through 16. Actually, I'm going to read from verse 1. Genesis chapter 15, verse 1. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, saying, "Do not fear, Abraham. I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great." Abraham said, "O Lord God, what will you give me, since I am childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" And Abraham said, "Since you have given no offspring to me, no one one born in my house is my heir. Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, see here, Bible intentionally says, it doesn't say the Lord came to him. It says the word of the Lord came to him. And from the original readers of the original language, they will click John chapter 1. That word was here. Right? The word of the Lord came to him, saying, this man will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir. And he took him outside and said, now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. And then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it. He said, O Lord God, how may I know that I will possess it? So here God promised Abraham two things. One is seed, offspring. Second is the land. And this is only after Abraham believes in God. So throughout Abraham's life, God tests Abraham to see if he really believes in him. And the ultimate test, as you know, was sacrificing Isaac. Right? But all these events in Abraham's life has to do with descendant and land, which are the two things that were lost as a result of Adam's disobedience. The relationship between God and Adam was like father and son. However, Adam became like the prodigal son, rejected the father and served another master because he listened to the words of the serpent rather than God. Right? And so that relationship was broken. And then they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, which was the land, territory, or place where they were able to dwell with God. So throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, this work of redemption that God has begun with Genesis 3:15 as the beginning proclamation. I will give you, he spoke to the woman, I will give you a son, offspring. The woman's seed of the woman. And the word seed means son or offspring. But it was in singular form, I will give you a son. Or shall I dare to say, I will give you the son that will restore you. Okay? And so that was the first messianic proclamation. And throughout the Bible, God promises, I will establish my people. And that connection, they need to be reconnected to God because Adam had broken that connection and fell away. That reconnection is called covenantal relationship. And so through the covenant, God makes his people, and God has to bring them to the place where he and the people can stay and dwell together in fellowship, in peace, peaceful fellowship. And so those two things are to be restored. And this time, God told Abraham, I'll give you a son. Abraham believed it. Right? Abraham was how old? And Sarah was how old? How old were they? Over 80. Right? Is this easy to believe? Not easy to believe, especially when Sarah had stopped her menstruation period. Right? And so, Abraham believed it. And then God said, this land I'll give it to you. And the Bible doesn't say Abraham believed right away. He asked the question, how will I know that you will? Which one is harder to believe? I'll give you this land versus I'll give you a son when you're 90 years old, 100 years old. Right? So if I dwell on this, we cannot finish the wilderness journey today. So as a reply to Abraham's question, God said, okay, then bring me this animals and cut it. And this is a ritual of making a covenant. So God makes a covenant, and verse 13, this is what God says to Abraham. This is how you will know that I will give you this land. Okay? God said to Abraham, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. Which country? Which nation is this foreign land? Egypt, right? But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. True?
Yes.
Is that what happened? Yes. And verse 15, as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, you will be buried at a good old age. Yes. Verse 16, then in the fourth generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. So God promises them they will come back to this land. And that is the Exodus and wilderness journey. And so there is a purpose why God is taking the Israelites through the wilderness to the land of Canaan, the promised land. It is to fulfill his promise to Abraham and promise to all mankind. I will make you my people, and I will reestablish the place where you and I can live together, just like Adam and I did in the Garden of Eden before sin came in. So this entire journey represents the journey of restoration and redemption. And so some theologians look at this as one gospel in the Old Testament, taking the Israelites from Egypt through the wilderness all the way to the land of Canaan. Foreshadows what we need to do. So I'd like to introduce to you this map. The Exodus and the wilderness journey. I hope and pray that by the end of the studies this time in this module, that you will be able to look at this map and say, this is the map of my life. In all of our readings and interpretation of the Bible, we need to be able to see two things, or two people in the Bible. First, we need to be able to see Jesus in there. Second, you need to be able to see yourself in there. If not, it's just an old story. If you don't see Jesus in there, might as well throw away the Old Testament. But if we see Jesus in there, and if you see yourself in there, the Bible becomes my book, my story. And when we see Jesus in there, later when we come to the New Testament, our understanding of Jesus and how he came to this world, what he did for our salvation, that understanding will become so much richer. And we will be able to really appreciate what Jesus did, not only on the cross, but from the fall all the way until today. And if we know how God works, if we know how God did his work in the Old Testament, how he did his work in the New Testament, then we might have an idea of how he does his work to save us today. So, as you probably know, but just to make sure, Egypt is here. This is Egypt, okay, all the way down here. And the land of Canaan is here. Okay. Their goal is to go from here to here. It took them 40 years. Why? But Egypt, as we can read in Revelation, chapter 11, verse 8. We'll open up to Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Was Jesus crucified in Egypt? No. But it says mystically, meaning Egypt represents the heart that crucified Jesus. The kind of disobedience and wickedness and sinfulness that caused us to crucify Jesus. And so Egypt becomes the foundation upon which we crucify Jesus. And so Egypt represents the world, sinful world. While the Israelites were in Egypt, they were not able to worship God because of the oppression. They were not able to keep their identity as the chosen people of God, the Israelites. And they had to assimilate into their culture of worshiping their gods. Just like many times we do in the world. We have to fit in somehow. We have to somehow do the things that they do, somehow end up believing in the things that they think and they believe. But God takes the Israelites out of Egypt into the wilderness. And if we can look at Acts chapter 7 verse 38. Acts chapter 7 verse 38. Verse 38, this is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness. It says, the congregation of the wilderness in Greek is ecclesia. Ecclesia is the Greek word for church. Church, those who are called out, right? And so, Deacon Stephen says, the wilderness was like church. The church in the wilderness. So right now, where are you? Where are you right now? In your life of faith. Are you still in Egypt? Or have you come out into the wilderness? But have you noticed, after you came out of, when the Israelites were coming out of Egypt, what was their vision? What was their expectation? As long as we come out of Egypt, we go to the land flowing with milk and honey. What does that connotate? Milk and honey. Prosperity, joy, and delightfulness, enjoyment. But lo and behold, they stepped out. It was dry, hot, difficult. When somebody was evangelizing you, they said, when you believe in Jesus, all will be fine. Did you hear that? You'll be blessed. You'll have joy in your life. But as soon as you stepped foot in the church or into the life of faith, what did you realize? Dry. Oh man, who deceived me into this? Where is the milk and honey flowing in my life? Isn't that true? I hope it's not true for you. But many times it is true. And they wanted to hurry up and get out of the wilderness, but it didn't work like they expected. 40 years. And then they went into the land of Canaan. So, are you ready to take this journey with me today?
Yes.
Key to this is if you're alert and obedient, you get into Canaan really fast. But if you disobey, fall asleep, and reject, then it'll take 40 years. So I pray that we will all be able to enter into the land of Canaan within today. So, and before I continue on, I'd like to just make a mention. Dean already introduced the History of Redemption series books. Most of the teachings that I will be sharing here will be from the History of Redemption series book series, and we have 5 of them so far in English. They were written in Korean, but I will be sharing mainly from the 2nd book, the Covenant of the Torch, today, and the 6th book, which is not quite translated into English yet. It was supposed to be printed already, but there were some delays at the publisher. So my plan didn't really come together. However, but I will still share with you about the high priest. And the 3rd day, I will be sharing from the 9th book. We don't have the book translated yet, but we have the picture book of the tabernacle that Moses built by the instruction of God. So, and Reverend Abraham Park basically, or the author, basically lived his life to prove to everyone the Bible is still alive,
Amen.
speaking to us. And his cry throughout his life was, if you really believe in Jesus, if you really love God, why do you not read the Bible? If you really believe that this Bible gives life, why do you not give it to your children? This faith. He said, we parents make plans to save up money or assets to pass down to our children so that they can have a better life. But he said, why do we not prepare this faith to pass down to them so that they can have eternal life?
Amen.
So that is the mindset and the philosophy behind these books. The books are like secondary source that will lead us to read the Bible. And if it doesn't, it's a failure.
Yeah.
We have to go back to the Bible. So, especially this Old Testament is as soon as I say Old Testament, your eyelids go down. Boring stuff. But hopefully we will find a reason why we need to study this. So I will skip the Exodus, the 10 plagues and all that event. We'll go right into the wilderness. The first campsite. Does anybody know how many campsites there were? 42 campsites altogether. 41 in the wilderness, and last one in Gilgal, which is in the land of Canaan. So 42 campsites, and we are only on the first one, Sukkoth. Sukkoth means booth, or even tabernacle. In Hebrew, the feast of the tabernacle in the month of Tishri, the 7th month, is called the feast of Sukkoth. Okay, Sukkoth, sheep or sheep booth or booth. And here we can see a big arrow, big red arrow, where that is. Okay. But when they came out, okay, we'll read a few verses here. Numbers chapter 33, verses 5 and 6. Then the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses and camped in Sukkoth. They journeyed from Sukkoth and camped in Etham, which is on the edge of the wilderness. Numbers chapter 33 will show us, tell us all the 42 campsites, step by step, in order. Exodus 13:20, it says, then they set out from Sukkoth and camped in Etham, in the edge of the wilderness. Edge of the wilderness meaning it's the beginning of the wilderness. So it's after Sukkoth, from Etham and from the Red Sea is the beginning of that wilderness, actual desert wilderness journey. Chapter 12, verse 37-38. This is something very important for us to notice. Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, and a very large number of livestock. This mixed multitude, what is that? When we come out in the wilderness, or our life of faith in the church, everybody brings out that mixed multitude in our hearts. You can consider yourself, one of you is the nation of Israel. Okay? Because we will, in the end, represent a nation. A mixed multitude, the mixed multitude were the Gentiles who lived among the Israelites. They were the rabble who had greedy desires and caused the Israelites to grumble and disobey. They were the people who had no concept of the promised land or the covenant of God. Why did they come out? Why did they come out? Because looking at the things happening, especially through the 10 plagues, they thought, wow, Israel is gaining power now. The dominion is, and God is helping the Israelites. So if I want to survive, I should change my cue to the Israelites. used to be in Egypt because they were the strongest and most powerful nation during that time. But Israel seems to be defeating Pharaoh. So change cue and stay with these guys. So they came out together. Not for the sake of seeing the fulfillment of God's promise, not for the sake of keeping the covenant, but for the sake of my interest, my gain, and my benefits. Numbers 11:4. The rabble who were among them had greedy desires. And also the sons of Israel wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat?" So here we can see when you understand, and I hope you have some knowledge about the wilderness journey, how the Israelites kept on grumbling and complaining against God throughout the wilderness, right? Especially in the first stages. But this verse tells us there's an initiator. You know, grumbling begins with one person. You don't know where it began. But like a gossip, it goes from one person to another and it spreads like wildfire. Right? And you did not have much grumbling heart, but when you hear that whisper into your ears, "Hey, why is this pastor so wrong? Why does he talk like that? Why is his voice like that? Why does he keep on telling us to do things?" Then you start processing in your head, "Oh, that's right." And next time you hear his sermon, you're like, "Wow, that's right. I didn't notice it before, but he's long. It's boring." See, it's the rebels. The Israelites were eating manna and they said, "Oh, I miss the meat that we used to eat in Egypt." "Oh yeah, the meat, the steak. Good job, you know." It makes you start hungering for the worldly things again. And I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, "Yes, there are rebels in my church." No, that's not what I'm trying to make you do. It's something in my heart, in each of our hearts, that little seed that buds and sprouts forth and causes that rebellious and grumbling heart. There's a saying, God took the Israelites out of Egypt, but it was difficult to take Egypt out of Israelites. And that's it, the rebel. Characteristics of the rebel. First, live to satisfy their greed. This is a checklist for us. When I came out of the world into the life with Jesus, into this so-called life of faith, did I bring this together with me? The wilderness the 40 years is a time to take that Egypt out of the Israelites. Wilderness journey will end sooner and faster if we can take these things out of us sooner. They enjoyed meat. Please don't take me wrong. I'm not supporting vegetarianism. I love meat. But here in the context, meat symbolizes worldly pleasures, the desires. Do you remember in Exodus chapter 16, they say to God, "God, all we see is manna, here and there. And because of this food, we do not have the desire." In the original language, it means sexual desire. And that's why they wanted meat. We want meat to arouse us, to give us more energy for the worldly things. They indulge in fleshly desires. The rebel was like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, who caused mankind to think otherwise than to obey the word of God. They brought out the disobedience of the Israelites in the wilderness and eventually caused them to perish in the wilderness. From there, they go to Etham. God leads them to Etham.
There's a lot of information that's being provided to us. will we have a chance to have maybe
Do you want to take?
no, whether we take a picture or you can pass it to us with your permission.
Okay.
We good?
These notes.
Very quickly, a bit hard.
Okay. Should I go slowly?
No.
But I'll try to share some of these notes later.
Yes.
If you can consider sharing the notes with us, we'll be grateful.
Okay. And I have 10 minutes. So, but before we go on, and can you believe I only have 10 minutes left of the first hour? And we have to somehow make it through the 42 campsites. You came to school on the wrong day. No, just kidding. We see 5 in this map. You can see 5 courses or 5 routes here. First is journey from Ramses to the wilderness of Sinai. Second is journey from the wilderness of Sinai to Rithma. Third is journey from Rithma, which is Kadesh, back to Kadesh. And journey from Kadesh to Brook Zered. And journey from Brook Zered to Gilgal. So the 42 campsites are divided into 5 different sections. And this kind of shows us 5 different stages of, at least for myself, 5 different stages of my life of faith. And every stage, I need to grow. We are on the first stage, where they just came into the wilderness. And they're discovering themselves first. They came out into the wilderness. First thing, what are they doing? Grumbling because of the multitudes, mixed multitudes. So sometimes, God allows us to see ourselves. Look at the reflection of ourselves when things don't go as we wanted and we expected. Etham, we'll do Etham and finish for a break. Etham means fort. Exodus 13, verse 20 to 22. Here, one thing that happened in Etham is this is a place where God began to lead them with the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. The pillars were the protection of God's lead. In Revelation chapter 1, we see a description of Jesus. And in that description, his leg is described as pillar of fire. And can you imagine? Now we realize that those pillars were leading the Israelites, and when there was enemy chasing after them, the pillar of fire came behind them and protected them. And it's the pillar of fire and clouds that led the Israelites and found a good place for them to camp. How many people were traveling together? We read earlier about 600,000, only counting men. Later in Mount Sinai, they take a census, and it's 603,550 people. Just counting men who are able to go into war. Men who are over 20 years of age and not too old. So including young and old and women, they say about, most scholars say about 2 million, some people say about, even up to about 4 million. To help you understand, imagine half of the Singapore population going on a summer retreat together. Where are you going to find a place for them to pitch their tents? Not easy. So it's the pillar of fire and clouds that led and that protected. Can you imagine if that was God walking with them and they only saw the feet of God? Sometimes we don't see his face and we say, oh, God is not here. But then we have to remember the pillars of fire, his feet are walking with us. Amen. They were the protection that was never removed all the way until they went into the land of Canaan. They were the protection of absolute safety. And so let us believe that no matter what happens, the pillars of Jesus and His feet are with us. And just like the well-known poem called Footprint, He's carrying us, and He's finding a place for us. And let us take a short break, and we'll come back and finish 42 campsites. Question?
Where in the Bible does it say that Jesus is described?
Revelation chapter 1. Shall we look it up really quickly? Verse 14 and 15. Verse 15, His feet were like burnished bronze when it had been made to glow in a furnace, and His voice was like a sound of many waters. There is another passage that speaks about pillars, but this His eyes like flame of fire, His feet were like burnished bronze. Burnished bronze is like a metal glowing with fire. And so the imagery is similar there. Okay. Any others? So we'll take a break.